We're starting with the discussion on inclusive growth and the business impact on inclusive growth, because there are many dimensions for that. And we have two excellent speakers to kick us off. Sigal Shelach, the CEO of JDC Israel, and Stephen Berkenfeld from Barclays. So please join me on the stage. While they settle in, Stephen is the Managing Director in Investment Banking at Barclays. His current roles include also the co-heading of the firm's Clean Tech initiative, the banking effort for emerging industrial technology companies, so you can kind of guess why he's interested in Israel, I guess, and also working on social impact banking initiative. He was also, until recently, on the board of BSR, which is our sister organization in the States, and involved with various initiatives on relating to the future of works and a more sort of inclusive employment initiative. Sigal, I think most of you already know. She's been a frequent speaker at our conferences. Last year, she spoke as the CEO of JDC Tevet, which is the employment initiative of JDC. Now she's the head of all the operation of JDC in Israel, but her PhD is in labor studies. So again, that's why I think all the three of us are here. So Sigal, I think we'll start with you. If we're speaking about business impact on inclusive growth, what are actually we speaking about in terms of the workforce today? Is it changing? Do we need to be aware of something that goes on, or could we simply continue with business as usual as we tend normally to be at?
So,
I think it's on.
It's on. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Momo, for having us. I have to start by saying that you brought my history here, but when we started in JDC in employment to talk about working with the business sector, the first thing we decided, led by Yael Slavin, who was a former employee of yours, she said, we don't need to invent any platform. There's Maala, they're the platform in Israel, and let's join them and do things together, and we've been doing good things together ever since. So thank you for that.
And it's a pleasure doing business together.
So to your question, I think that's probably the most relevant question, is why now? Why are we waking up now? Is it anything different than what has been done 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and so on? So the first answer is that I think it was time also 10 years ago, okay? But now it's becoming something that's inevitable. So it's mostly the crossover between technological changes and the demographic changes that are happening here in Israel. We see that, as the World Economic Forum put it already in 2016 and again now in 2018 in its Jobs for the Future publication, it's really a fourth industrial revolution. And when we look at the effect of this revolution at the population, especially in Israel, we see mostly three groups that will be tremendously affected, and probably in order to be a country that's more equal and provides at least the opportunity to earn a living wage for its citizens, we need to pull together government, the individuals, and businesses. So the three groups that we see is, the first group is the group that's actually the group that doesn't hold skills. I don't know if you know, but today, the group of the ages between 20 and 24, those who are going into the labor market, about 60% of them are actually not going to hold or are not going to benefit from any post-high school education, which means that a lot of them will not have skills that will take them to the future. The second group is people who actually have skills and went to the academia or went to vocational training or technical education. It's a small group, technical education and vocational training. Their skills will be outdated, upskilling will be needed in a very, very, very fast pace. And a third group, which is actually changing all the time, but are the new incoming people into the labor market, so it was millennials and the next generations, which actually understand the market much better than us, and they understand that in order to be relevant, they'll need to reskill and upskill all the time.
That's the Y generation that we keep on discussing. So if we'll focus on the first two groups, I guess that the first group is what we, or at least some of them are what we know as the working poor. And in a way, when we prepared for that, and you're doing a strategic process now and looking at all the data, it looks a bit scary to look at the numbers of the working poor and maybe also the second group.
So if you ask the Ministry of Finance in Israel, they'll tell you, oh, it's not a problem, okay? Because working poor, I mean, in two-earner, full-time job families, the percentage of working poor is not even 6%. But it grew tremendously. It grew from 2.5% to 6%. And actually, it's probably not the right outlook, because when we look at people, we need to look at people that can work in the labor market, and a lot of them can work, 1.5 jobs in a family and so on. Mm-hmm. So the numbers are much larger, they're growing, and I think it actually hurts the basis of democracy, the basis of actually giving people the right to earn a living from work. And this is something that we really need to be aware of. And in order to make this different, employers will have to take a major, major role, thinking about the role not only of being or training for specific skills, but actually part of taking part in training for non-specific skills as well in Israel.
And I think you're reorganizing the work around three pillars of skilling, those who don't have the basic skills, upskilling, and then reskilling.
Right. Yeah. So
you had your skills, but they're not relevant anymore. You need to be reskilled, right?
Right. So all of these actually need to change. So skilling in Israel is very much geared towards academic training. Actually, we ran after America. We went in that direction, not Switzerland, not Germany, but America. And we find that we actually need a workforce that's much more diverse with technical skills and so on, and this needs to change. And we actually, a few years ago, already started to work with the vocational training unit in the Ministry now of Welfare and Labor to look how to open the vocational training to work with employers to have training that is geared toward what the employers need. In terms of upskilling, look, the country is completely unprepared for this, okay? So today, if you're let's say a blue-collar worker, and you probably don't have any funds that, like teachers or other people who are academics, you cannot afford yourself to train yourself other than if the employer trains for you. So the country actually needs to build a whole system of preparing for a labor market that people will change occupations. The WEF actually wrote that 40% of the skill sets will change by 2020. They interviewed about 300 VPHRs from more than 20 countries, covering 15 million employees around the world. And so that means that even people who have skills will need to be upskilled, and the system is not geared for that.
Okay. So let's have the US and global perspective, Stephen. You have the privilege of looking at companies, deciding whether to do a deal or not, but you have your perspective on the work, on the future of work. How does it all look, the changing world of work?
Well, thank you, Momo. Good morning, everyone. There's a lot going on here. I see this image behind us. And I think this is the first time I've been translated into Hebrew. I'm just wondering, is someone doing that, or is that automated? Does anyone know?
Somebody is doing that.
Someone is doing that.
This is a human person that's writing the text.
In the booth over there. That's a job that won't last for much longer. So I do bring a U.S. perspective to this, but just in the discussions we were having beforehand, I think there's a lot of parallels between the United States and Israel and the rest of the world, for that matter. My first awareness of this issue came in 2009, post the recession. And I'd go to a conference a research conference in a big industrial company, we get up there and say that since the recession, we've laid off 40,000 employees, and half of those cuts are permanent. And that was a pause, you know, an aha moment, right? This is a recession, this is cyclical. Why would half of those cuts be permanent? What's happening? And then I started looking into this a little bit more. The companies I was seeing, healthcare companies, technology companies, not having any impact on their business through the recession or very modest. They were engaging in layoffs too. All companies of all sizes were doing it. We have an expression in the United States that a recession is a terrible thing to waste. And I think what happened coming out of the Great Recession, and I think that was really a turning point in this, is that companies saw that as an opportunity to rationalize their workforce, to take a look at how they had improved efficiency through technology, mostly information technology, as opposed to outright automation, and say, how can I do more with less? And that's what every organization in the United States has done. Everyone has looked at their workforce, and whether that led to direct layoffs, which it did after the recession, or just not hiring new people as people would leave, retire, move on to other things. There's a different attitude now of how do I use my human resources as efficiently as possible for a lot of different reasons. Part of it economic, there's others we can cover later. But they look at human resources now much like they used to look at energy or raw materials, right? The less I have, the better. The more profitable I can be, the easier it'll be to manage my business. And you know, the question is that resiliency, sustainability? You know, and I think unfortunately that's the way companies look at it, company managements look at it. That I am going to try to rationalize my use of all resources, including human resources. But as Sigal was saying, human resources are different. There are other issues that go along with it. It has broader economic and societal impact. And you know, we refer to it as an issue of a collective action problem. That any one company might look to rationalize its workforce to use as few workers as possible and maximize their profitability. But when all companies do it, then you have a much bigger issue. And there's a story that is told in these future work circles quite a bit. It goes back, a historic story. Henry Ford II was taking Walter Reuther, the head of the United Auto Workers Union, around one of the new factories. And he was pointing out all the new machinery and all the automation. And he asked Walter Reuther, how are you going to get all these machines to pay your union dues? And his response was, how are you going to get all these machines to buy your cars, right? And so I think a lot of what you're seeing in the United States, the issues around the anxiety and insecurity of the workforce, the growing inequality, come back to this change in how we manage our human resources to try to do it as productively, as efficiently as possible.
And can the wheel be turned backwards, do you think? I mean, looking at industries that are now changing, and again, I think you made a point when we earlier discussed that we don't necessarily need to discuss what will happen in 30 years, but there are major changes that will probably happen in about 5 to 7 years. So you know what? Let's start with what industries do you think will need less employees in the coming 5, 6 years?
Look, I think all of them.
All of them.
And so there's this debate going on now. There's still a fair number of economists that say we've always had improvements in technology, we've always had displacement of jobs, and new work emerged. And you're just being a Luddite. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but the Luddites were the ones back in England who were smashing the weaving machines because they were taking their jobs. And the economists say you're just being a Luddite.
It happened in Israel as well, by the way.
Right. And so, you know, my response was the Luddites were not wrong. They did lose their jobs. And the fact that there were new jobs 20 or 30 years later didn't really help them all that much. So there's this ongoing debate with some economists saying there'll be new work that emerges. There'll be new jobs. And then there's the other side of it, led largely by technologists and futurists who say, no, you know, if we want to, we can automate almost every job, if not every job. So I don't personally think that the same amount of work will emerge in new forms. I think there will be a shortage of work. But let's put that aside, right? Time will tell. The three things that there is agreement on, and these are very, very important points that have really significant policy impact. The first is that this transition from the jobs of today to the work of the future, and I use those terms very deliberately, jobs and work, I'll get to that in a second, is going to be very disruptive, right? There's, just like the Industrial Revolution, the agricultural revolution was very disruptive. There'll be a lot of people that lose their jobs. There'll be a lot of people that don't fit into the economy, especially at either end of the work spectrum, the younger and the older. The second is that there's agreement that there's going to be increased polarization, that there'll be higher end jobs and work that pays a lot, and a lot of lower end work. In the US, work that gets paid at the minimum wage, taking care of the elderly, home health care. And so that hollowing out of the middle, that increased inequality, is a big issue too. And finally, there's really a consensus that work will be delivered differently, that we're going to move away from full-time jobs where you are employed by one company, we refer to as W-2 jobs, right? Where you get all your benefits and tax taken out, into work that is more independent contractors, freelancers, right? Gig economy, sharing economy. All these things together, someone will cobble together a living. But that also raises a lot of issues, especially in the United States, because so much is tied to your job. So many of your benefits, your health care, your retirement, parental leave, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, right? Paid sick days, paid vacation days. Even the ability to get a mortgage is much more challenging if you don't have a job. So as work moves from jobs to all of these contingent workers, we have to figure out how to provide all of those things that used to be tied to a job, and also to deal with the insecurity of not knowing how long you're going to have that work for, and what's going to happen as you move from one position to the next.
So we need to be prepared for a very kind of stabilized work of environment, much less than we are now. And do we see the same thing in Israel, Sigal?
Yeah, we experience the same thing. We see companies who already went through the automation, and maybe, you know, the new phrase is augmentation of work, working robotics and data analytics together with people, but still the skills of the people who work side by side, those people are changing dramatically. We see that change, and in Israel, we are even should be more worried than the United States in terms that when we look at the skill surveys, the PIAC, those who know that actually measures not only your education level, but your skills, your actually mathematical, English, ability to solve complex problem in a technological environment. We are measured like probably in between 24 and 28, comparing to the 33 to 36 OECD countries that are measured. And first of all, this is tied directly to productivity. We know today, we have a research of the Bank of Israel. And second of all, for people, we understand that even if you don't have education, you need to have those skills. And we see two populations, especially in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox and the Arab community, who fall far behind on those skills. And looking forward, there are growing communities in Israel. They'll be our pool talent. So we need to look also into this, you know, very special demography in Israel and see how we can, together with these communities, actually use this opportunity. And it's young communities, you know, it's wonderful. We have a growing pool talent. If, you know, if there'll be the same, more jobs, we're in a great place. We just need to train them. If there'll be less jobs, I'm sure there'll be anyhow a very big change in policy, universal basic income or something of a sort that will actually allow people to live.
And if you want to conclude, and I'll ask you both the same question. You've talked about the way that employees, their world is changing. So how should the employer change as well? Does the employers have any new roles in that changing world of work, or only benefits of having more quiet and, I would say, less problematic machines rather than humans who have all kinds of things that are, that you need to deal with as a management?
Well, that's a broad question. I'll disagree with you. I think it's worse in the United States.
Oh, good. Finally, things are not the worst possible in Israel.
And I think it's worse for a few reasons. One, because we do have this focus on shareholders, maximizing value to shareholders in the United States that's beyond where it is anywhere else in the world. And again, so much is tied to your job. We don't have the same safety net, starting with healthcare, that you have throughout Western Europe, throughout the rest of the world. Look, I think that, in my view, it's technology. It's the ability to do more with less that's leading to the growing inequality that we're seeing in the United States and a lot of other countries. Because what it's doing is decreasing the demand for labor and therefore the value of labor. And more of the value, at historically high levels, is being shifted to profits and capital and less to work and wages. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, we're at a higher level of that split than we've ever seen before. More to profit, less to wages. And I think that's what's contributing to this growing inequality. Now, just to give you a sense of the inequality in the United States, there are over 40% of adults in the United States, this is from Federal Reserve surveys, who, in the event of an emergency, a car that broke down, they lost their heating system in their home, something like that, would not have $400 available to them to cover that emergency expense. Mm-hmm. $400. They would either have to borrow that money or sell something. Now, the United States, right, the richest country in the world, 40% couldn't afford $400. We have so many people that are working full-time jobs, 2,000 hours a year, and living in poverty, right? Amazing. Because the minimum wage is the same as it's been for a long time. Yeah. The federal minimum wage is under $8 an hour. The Piketty study said that inequality in the United States, I think it was 27 times in 1980. What I mean is the top 1% earned 27 times what the bottom 50% earned on average. That number is now up to 81. Wow. 81 is the kind of inequality that you see in the Democratic Republic of Congo or Nigeria. It's so far off of where you are in Western Europe, and I don't know what the Israeli numbers are. So it's so extreme. And that inequality, right, starts to break down your society. Yeah. And if companies are thinking about increasing the pie, what's better for them? It's not better for any company that's selling products, a B2C company, that a billionaire gets another $100 million. Yeah. It's better that that money's spread more widely where everyone will actually spend it and put it back into the economy. So there's ultimately a revenue issue. I just put an exclamation point of how sort of insensitive companies are to this, and you're talking about corporate social responsibility. You said in your introductory remarks sustainability. In the United States, sustainability very rarely applies to how you treat your employees. Right? There's climate change, there's environmental sustainability, right? There's your supply chain, there's diversity, that's important. But in terms of paying your employees a living wage or reasonable benefits or giving them a career, keeping them employed, not outsourcing their work, that's not part of sustainability programs for large companies. We have something that I've named in the United States productivity layoffs. And you'll see how the United States is a little different. There are companies with record profits, record stock prices, record amount of cash that are announcing every year a couple of thousand layoffs just because they've become more productive. They're just taking the impact of technology and rationalizing it. And nobody in the United States complains about that. Yeah. The media doesn't cover it. No politicians say anything. So imagine a really healthy company that was laying off workers, what the reaction would be in Israel, in Germany, anywhere else in the world. Yeah. In the United States, it's gotten so bad that companies have simultaneously announced those layoffs and multi-billion-dollar stock buyback programs. They have so much cash, they don't know what to do with it. They're buying back $1 billion of stock, but they need to lay off that next 1,000 employees. And so, you know, you look at what is corporate responsibility. You know, ultimately, we're moving in the direction of a society that's very polarized, that isn't an increasing pie. And again, I think this is a lot of what you're seeing manifest itself socially and politically in the United States. Yeah. It's this anxiety and this fight over a shrinking pie.
Okay, so Sigal, with those good and bad news, what's the call for employers as far as you can see it?
So, following actually in what you said, I'll say two
bring
things.
The mic a bit,
In terms of, there are actually two lenses. So first, the business lens, even before we talk corporate social responsibility, if something really drastic won't happen in the next few years in terms of how we skill, how we reskill, how we upskill, we won't have people that are geared for the jobs that will actually grow, because there are growing jobs, as you know, that have to be more technological, more oriented towards data and so on. So that's the first thing. So employers have to be very aware. I saw a quote by Richard Bernstein. He said, train your people very well so they'll be able to go to other employers. Treat them very well so they don't. Okay, so I think that's a very, very good call. Okay. The second is exactly what you talked about. I mean, we have to look at how the wealth spreads, and I think businesses have to look at it. We actually did it together. Yeah. We have a program that we go to businesses and we look together with you into how the workers, the poor workers actually in the companies are treated, and what each company can do in order to better their employees. And this is something that if the whole business sector actually is involved in, the picture in Israel will be completely different in a few years.
Okay, Stephen, one last remark.
Yeah, one last comment. There's a quote that I think sums up the way the United States looks at it and how people are a challenge. And again, it's not just maximizing profit. We can cover that later in the session of why they want to have less people. But there's a quote attributed to Henry Ford I, who said, "Why is it I always get the whole person when all I want is a pair of hands?" And as long as companies have the view that they just want the task done as efficiently as possible, can I outsource it? Can I just throw more work on fewer people because it's less of a headache than hiring someone and training them and all the issues, all the baggage that comes with it? Yeah. We're going to have this issue. We have to create more jobs. We have to rebuild our infrastructure. We have to think about distributed economies. We have to look at the safety net and universal basic income in the longer term. But in the short term, what can be done is that companies have to change that attitude and say, you know what, I am willing to make an investment in that person. I am willing to make that commitment. I am willing to give them opportunities to grow. That's worthwhile, not just for me as a company, not just in terms of what's very core to me, but my broader business, but it's also important in terms of what my responsibility is to the economy, to society. That will all be much better off if companies take that approach than saying, just give me a pair of hands.
Fantastic. So we're in a better start than the US, but basically what you're saying, what you two were saying, is that we need a change of mindset as the crisis kind of shadows over us. And I think, again, I will quote the new strategy of skilling, upskilling, and reskilling in a constantly, basically. So please join me in thanking Sigal and Stephen. We actually had, if you haven't noticed, Stephen Sigal on the stage. Our next speaker is Shamina Singh from MasterCard. So before I ask you to the stage, let's see some of the work that MasterCard is doing, and I'll collect my cards.